Although the big surface warships of the Japanese fleet were now permanently based near Singapore, Japanese planners would much prefer to have kept them in home waters. Near Japan, they would have been close to the carriers, which had to be home to wait for their new planes and aircrew. The problem was that Japan was suffering from a desperate fuel shortage, and so the big ships had to be kept close to the East Indies oil fields. The cause of the Japanese fuel crisis lay with the activities of the American Pacific submarine fleet. 140 boats now prowled the Japanese sea lanes, and they had sunk 4 million tons of Japan's shipping. The Empire had neglected its anti-submarine defenses until it was too late, and by now it had lost more than half its oil tankers to underwater attacks. As a result, the Japanese Navy would have fuel enough for only one major sortie, and would be unable to venture out again for another 2 months. For the Japanese, the worst possible scenario would be if the Americans attacked before the Imperial carrier force could unite with the rest of the fleet off Singapore. If that happened, the show plans would still have to go into operation, but the Navy would be forced to rely on its single remaining asset, the massive hitting power of its heavy surface warships. Japan could still field the big guns of 9 battleships and more than a dozen heavy cruisers. The ships had been fitted with the most up-to-date radar, and if they could get in amongst an invasion force, preferably at night, they could cause unimaginable carnage and destruction. Displacing a massive 64,000 tons, the Yamato-class battleships were the largest naval vessels yet built by any nation. Yamato and her sister ship Musashi mounted the biggest guns ever fitted on a warship. The main battery was 9 18-inch weapons in 3 triple turrets. Each turret weighed 2,500 tons, and the guns could fire an armor-piercing shell weighing nearly 1.5 tons over 26 miles. The ship's armor protection matched their firepower. Belt armor was up to 16 inches thick and could stop an 18-inch shell at 12.5 miles. 9-inch thick deck armor could withstand the impact of a 1-ton bomb dropped from 15,000 feet. Yamato's anti-aircraft guns were also heavily armored, but this was as much to protect their crews from the blast of her own 18 inches than from anything the enemy might do. At Leyte Gulf, the gigantic Yamato and Musashi would sail at the heart of the Japanese battle line. The most numerous of all Japanese aircraft, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter, was the mainstay of the Navy's land and carrier-based fighter squadrons. The Zero was a fast and highly maneuverable aircraft, which in the first year of the war had no equal. However, its performance had been achieved by keeping weight to a minimum, and that meant no armor plate, self-sealing fuel tanks, or armored windscreen. By 1943, the Zero had been outclassed by the new generation of American fighters in speed, firepower, and protection. Although the Zero was a fighter, some Japanese commanders realized that it would just be capable of carrying a 550-pound bomb. Flown by a courageous and determined pilot, willing to ram an enemy warship, the bomb-armed Zero could become the most formidable weapon ever directed at an American fleet. Although by the war's end, many different aircraft types would be used in kamikaze missions, the fast and maneuverable Zero would prove exceptionally well suited to penetrating the defenses of even the most powerful carrier task force. The Mitsubishi Ki-21 bomber had first entered service with Japanese Army aviation in August 1938. The aircraft had spearheaded the bombing offensive in China and Southeast Asia, and at the time was as good as any twin-engine bomber in the world. Although by 1944 the Ki-21 Sally was obsolete and suffering heavy losses at the hands of Allied fighters, the aircraft remained in first-line service. In the Philippines, as part of a mixed force of Army aviation bombers, Sallies would operate alongside Navy aircraft as part of the Show 1 plan. In 10 months to September 1944, the Japanese Imperial Navy had lost more than 5,200 pilots, 42% of its aircrew. Most of these had been operating from land bases. As for the carrier pilots, the most highly skilled of them all, they had been virtually wiped out. The Japanese Army had also suffered catastrophic losses of aircrew, and at a time when aircraft production was up and substantial numbers were reaching the squadrons, there was a critical shortage of flyers. In Japan, both Army and Navy training schools had simplified their programs in the hope of producing more pilots in a shorter time. However, the consequence was a significant drop in proficiency. Chronic fuel shortages added to the problem. Flying time was drastically curtailed, and new pilots had virtually no combat training. The pilot problem was much worse for the carrier air groups. Normally, 400 hours in the air was needed before a trainee could even hope to master carrier operations. And pilots now came out of the schools with only 200. While both Army and Navy tried desperately to train the pilots they needed if they were to have any hope of defeating the next American invasion, the Japanese fleet near Singapore embarked on an arduous training program of its own. Particular attention was paid to anti-aircraft gunnery and night fighting tactics. The Japanese Navy had always come off best in night battles, and it was hoped that by the most careful preparation, even an enemy as powerful as the Americans could be outfought and humiliated.